They never suspected a thing when you walked in with that gentle little grin, did they? That soft expression, that calm posture, that angelic quiet that made them think you were harmless. People like that are always fooled by appearances. They judge the surface, never the depth. They assume kindness means weakness and softness means submission. They believed you were easy to control, easy to provoke, easy to maneuver like a pawn on a board they thought they owned. And while they were busy underestimating you, treating you like a background character in their cheap little story, you were studying them with an intelligence they couldn't begin to comprehend. That smile was never innocence. It was the warning they didn't know how to read. Some of them pushed their luck, thinking your politeness meant they had a permanent advantage. They mistook your patience for fear, your restraint for fragility, your silence for surrender. It's almost adorable how boldly people behave when they think the other person won't push back. So they tested you, nudged you, threw little insults wrapped in laughter, hoping you would break in a predictable way. You didn't. You let them run their mouths, reveal their intentions, show the world exactly what kind of creatures they were. You held that angelic expression because it disarmed them, because it lowered their guard, because it made them think they understood you. But underneath that calm exterior lived a storm waiting for the right moment. Their disrespect didn't bother you the way they imagined. It informed you. Every shade of condescension, every smug smirk, every attempt to undermine, you became a brushstroke painting a portrait of their insecurity. You learned their weaknesses by watching their arrogance blossom unchecked. You saw the cracks beneath their confidence, the fear behind their swagger, the desperation behind their cruelty. They thought they were playing you, not realizing you were memorizing every move they made. And when you finally smiled at them again, they believed it was forgiveness. They believed it meant they had won.
Oh, the naivety!
Then something shifted, not because you exploded, but because you stopped feeding their illusion. You withdrew your reactions, your explanations, your emotional availability. In that silence, they felt the world tilt. Their ego began trembling, confused why their tricks no longer worked. You weren't bending anymore. You weren't entertaining them. You weren't offering a single expression they could decode. That smile they used to misread became their undoing. It no longer reassured them, it made them suspicious. They saw something in your eyes they had never seen before. Clarity. Clarity is dangerous in the hands of someone who refuses to be controlled. Slowly, they began unraveling under their own pressure. They panicked, doubled their efforts, threw accusations, grasped at any form of control they still believed they had. You said nothing. You watched, and your silence became the loudest force in the room. They could feel your power rising even though you didn't lift a finger. You didn't need rage. They created their own downfall with paranoia alone. They started tripping over their lies, contradicting themselves, sabotaging their alliances. They couldn't understand why everything felt so unstable, unaware that you had quietly taken the ground out from under them without ever breaking that calm expression. Your rise wasn't explosive, it was precise. You outmaneuvered them without theatrics, without shouting, without dramatic gestures. One decision at a time, one boundary at a time, one upgrade at a time. You stepped into a version of yourself that didn't beg for respect, but commanded it. People began noticing the difference. The strength behind your smile, the discipline in your choices, the calm power that radiated without permission. You looked like an angel still, but now they finally saw the sharpness beneath. They saw the intelligence they misjudged. They saw the resolve they thought you lacked, and it terrified them. That's when the tables turned completely. They watched you move with a confidence that made their earlier arrogance look pathetic. The same people who laughed at you now avoided your gaze. The ones who dismissed you now mimicked your tone. They felt the shift and scrambled to adjust, but the gap between who you were and who you became was too wide for them to cross. The demon they feared wasn't violence or cruelty. It was mastery over yourself, over your emotions, over the situation they once believed they controlled. You didn't have to destroy them. They destroyed themselves trying to catch up to someone who had already outgrown them. In the aftermath, they attempted to rewrite the story. They blamed you for changing too much, too fast, too suddenly. They claimed you betrayed them by evolving beyond their expectations. But the truth echoed louder than their excuses. They disrespected someone who was never their equal to begin with. You played the long game while they played with their insecurities. You stayed silent while they exposed themselves. You observed while they unraveled. And when the moment finally came, you executed the most devastating move. You outgrew them completely. Now they see you differently. Not as the harmless soul they once thought you were, but as a presence they can't predict or dominate. They stare at the remains of the old dynamic, trying to understand how it all slipped away. They remember your angelic smile, but what haunts them now is the realization that the same smile carried the intelligence that outplayed them. What they assumed was innocence was actually restraint. What they mistook for fear was strategy. What they underestimated became the force that toppled their entire game. They never realized how deeply you were reading them while pretending to shrink beneath their shadows. They assumed every quiet pause meant intimidation. Every lowered gaze meant nervousness. Every moment you allowed them to dominate the room meant you were incapable of challenging them. They never questioned why your fear looked so controlled, so consistent, so convenient. They didn't understand that real fear doesn't observe. Real fear doesn't calculate. Real fear doesn't memorize the patterns, rhythms, and fractures in the people trying to break it. But you did. You studied how they spoke, how they lied, how they reacted to pressure. You watched every crack forming in their armor long before they noticed the weight it carried. Your silence didn't protect you from them. It prepared you for them. Eventually, the thing that unsettled them most wasn't your transformation, but the realization that you had been capable of this all along. They replay old interactions in their minds now, searching for the moment when you shifted, unaware that you were never shifting. You were waiting for the right time to move, waiting for the right angle to strike, waiting for the right version of yourself to emerge with deadly precision. They see the truth now. You weren't caught off guard by their manipulation. You were gathering ammunition. You let them reveal themselves fully before you dismantled their entire foundation. What they thought was fear was the cold discipline of someone who refuses to act until the outcome is already decided. The power of your strategy came from the fact that they believed they were the only ones playing. They danced around you with arrogance, using every trick they had to intimidate you, control you, distort your confidence. Meanwhile, every time they tried to crush you, they exposed a flaw in themselves. Every insult made them predictable. Every lie made them transparent. Every ego-driven move showed you how easily they could be dismantled. They thought you were fragile because you didn't fight back. They thought you were lost because you didn't defend yourself. But your silence wasn't surrender. It was a magnifying glass, exposing their nature in painfully vivid detail. Nothing rattles a manipulator more than discovering their opponent wasn't intimidated, just patient. They relied on your supposed fear to fuel their confidence, never recognizing how unnatural your stillness truly was. Fear shakes, fear trembles, fear reacts. But you were still as stone, absorbing information, absorbing intentions, absorbing their every attempt at dominance. Your quiet became a weapon sharp enough to slice them open from the inside out. And when the time came for you to rise, your understanding of them was so precise, so complete, that they never stood a chance against the version of you they accidentally created. The revelation hit them slowly, like a drip of cold water down the spine. They realized you weren't avoiding confrontation. You were choosing your battleground. You weren't suppressing emotion. You were controlling the temperature. You weren't overwhelmed. You were letting them exhaust themselves. They thought they were forcing you into corners, not noticing that you had already mapped every exit. Their aggression became predictable. Their patterns became repetitive. Their confidence became brittle. They pushed harder, unaware that every push made your eventual retaliation more devastating. And when you finally stepped forward with clarity instead of chaos, they felt the shift like a blade sliding across their throat. They didn't understand how someone who looked so defeated could suddenly stand with such authority. They didn't know how to respond because they had never prepared for the possibility that you had been strategizing from the very beginning. They weren't scared of your anger. They were terrified of your control Anger they can match, manipulate, or provoke. But strategy strips them bare, leaving them exposed to someone who already knows exactly where to strike. Their panic grew when they realized your calm wasn't a facade. It was power. They couldn't hide behind excuses or charm or performance anymore. You saw through every tactic because you had watched them in their most unguarded moments, the moments they believed you were too afraid to notice. You built your response around the truth of who they were, not the lie they tried to project. And once you understood their truth, they became easy to defeat, predictable, small. You weren't reacting to them anymore. You were dismantling them with precision. Now the aftermath feels surreal to them. They wander through the debris of a battle they thought they controlled, struggling to understand how they lost so completely. They try to tell themselves that you changed overnight, that you became someone new. But deep down, they know the truth, that you were always capable of this, always sharper than you appeared, always stronger than they knew. Fear never held you back. Patience did. Restraint did. Calculation did. You outplayed them not because you were lucky, but because you were disciplined enough to wait for the moment. They exposed the exact weakness you needed. Their regret festers in the silence you left behind. They remember every moment you seemed vulnerable, every moment you seemed hesitant, every moment you seemed small, and it haunts them because those were the moments you were watching them most closely. They realize they performed their entire deception in front of someone who was mentally 5 steps ahead. They realize nothing about your rise was spontaneous. You built it brick by brick while they mocked the foundation. And now they live in the ruins of their own arrogance, knowing you foresaw all of this while smiling calmly through their theatrics. There comes a moment, usually quiet and almost unnoticeable, when the one who has been observing finally decides the game is over. You reached that moment long before they realized anything had shifted. While they were busy performing dominance, you were mapping out outcomes. While they bragged, you calculated angles. While they pushed, you studied pressure points. And when you finally made your move, calm, deliberate, precise, it felt to them like betrayal. But betrayal implies loyalty, and you were never loyal to their delusions. You were loyal to your evolution. The truth that haunts them is this: you didn't flip the script out of emotion. You ended the performance because you had already seen the ending in your mind. Strategy always looks like magic to people who mistake their own noise for intelligence. What crushes them now is not the loss itself, but the realization that they practically handed you the blueprint to dismantle them. Every moment they believed you were intimidated, you were actually learning the language of their weaknesses. Every smug instruction they gave you, you filed away as evidence of what they feared most. Every insult was a confession. Every manipulation was an admission of insecurity. You turned their attacks into information. You turned their arrogance into insight. And you turned their confidence into the very rope they eventually hung themselves with. Fear would have frozen you. Strategy sharpened you. And they can't escape the humiliation of knowing they helped craft the version of you that outplayed them. They also can't hide from the fact that their downfall wasn't loud or dramatic. It was surgical. They were expecting a confrontation, an explosion, a final clash where they could perform victimhood if things didn't go their way. But you offered them none of that. You simply stopped playing. You withdrew your energy, your reactions, your presence. And without your participation, their manipulation starved. They tried resurrecting old tactics, but nothing worked anymore because your silence had altered the entire battlefield. They felt powerless not because you attacked them, but because you stopped feeding the illusion that they mattered. That is the kind of defeat people never recover from, the kind where the other person doesn't even need to strike. Even now, they try to frame your strategy as coldness, your growth as cruelty, your boundaries as punishment. But deep down, they know those are lies designed to protect their pride. What really terrifies them is how long you let them talk without reacting, how long you let them build their fantasy of superiority without intervening. They understand now that you could have broken the illusion at any moment. You simply chose the moment that would teach them most. You taught them that underestimating someone quiet is a dangerous habit. You taught them that silence can be sharper than rage. and you taught them that the scariest opponent in any game is the one who looks like they aren't playing. So here they sit, replaying every moment they misread, every gesture they laughed at, every silence they thought meant fear, and the weight of it crushes them from the inside. They know now that your fear was never real, your stillness was never surrender, your softness was never vulnerability. You were gathering data, you were preparing the ending. You were mastering the psychological terrain while they danced blindly across it. And the final irony, the one that twists the knife, is that you didn't even need revenge. Strategy was the revenge. Evolution was the weapon. And your rise, quiet and unshakable, was the perfect ending to a game they never should have started.